What'd you think of that intro, John? Do you like
That's
that?
very, very flashy, very flashy.
Yeah, the genesis of the Peak Performance Project was really RETR. So RETR obviously has an incredible amount of data, and I love their technology. We use them on a lot of internal projects, but I've helped them over the years just advance their platform and feature functionality, so it's just more useful to people who are dissecting the market. And they just said, Rick, how interesting would it be if you interviewed or met with and talked to peak performers, whether they're loan officers, leaders, mortgage professionals in every state in the United States. So I'm featuring, and you're our Rhode Island feature, but I'm featuring everybody across all 50 states, and I'm actually going to do two territories. I'm going to do Puerto Rico and Guam, and
Right.
and so I'm looking forward to. I think I'm going to do Puerto Rico and Guam in person. I think that sounds
Wow.
a lot. I think that sounds a lot better.
Well, you get to travel, right?
Yeah, I mean Rhode Island, I don't have to go there in person.
I don't know. Have you been here in a while? It's starting to look
No,
a little more like Guam, you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
Coastal, very coastal.
Yeah.
But no, man. Look, we've known each other for a long time, and in a lot of ways, especially in your Flagstar days, like you were kind of the guy, right? You've had a real market presence and influence in your production leadership, I think for a long time, and so I was excited to have you on the show because it was one of those questions around, like, as we grow organizations, how do we hold our own teams accountable for growth so that they're constantly sort of trying to operate at a pretty high level, but then how do we identify that growth, right, when we interview loan officers and we try to get them to be better versions of who they are, you know what I mean?
Right.
So give us a little bit of a background of your career, how you got in the business, and then and just your evolution, and we'll talk about some
Oh,
mortgage market dynamics in a second.
gosh, how I got into the business.
What is the Sally story? Not the sad
So,
story, not the sad story, the Sally story.
yeah. So yeah, I was, I had been a television actor when I was younger, doing commercials and some, smaller parts and stuff, and mostly living off commercial residuals. And, yeah,
You and Ben Affleck could have
yeah, right.
partnered up.
That would have been nice for me, right? Yeah. Uh, no, and then my dad passed suddenly, very young, and I went in to help out in a family business that needed help kind of winding down and being sold. And so I had left the business, and then I sort of was a little lost, right? My dad was dead, and I was, so I started doing a little more acting again, and I met a girl, right? You know how that happens.
Oh yeah.
And she had she was the corporate strategy consultant doing for Fortune 50 companies, and she had a big job, and she traveled, and I was pretty sure that it wasn't going to be too cool to marry someone who was an unemployed actor, right? So, because I was just kind of dabbling back in it again, and so I had a buddy that I used to mountain bike with, and he used to say, "A guy like you'd make a lot of money in the mortgage business," and I'd be like, "Yeah, go after yourself. I don't want to fill out forms for a living." Like, I would tease him about that. And then finally, when I met this girl, I really to get a job, I called him. I go, "Remember that job you offered me?" He goes, "Oh yeah, the one you told me to shove up my." I go, "Yeah, that one." I said, "Is that still on the table?" And they were very nice. It was GMAC Mortgage, right? They had that up and
Oh
running
yeah.
manual. They were really good program for getting new people involved. And he hired me, and they trained me. And yeah, and I started as an originator. They wouldn't let me go. His territory was where I grew up, so he wouldn't let me go there. So I went and I worked in South County, Rhode Island to start. And I, was working. And then I was working in an office where, how they hire managers that are top producers, but they don't really manage. It's something that we love to do in our industry, right? And those top producer personality traits that make them a top producer are the same ones that make them a bad manager, right? Because it's all about them and they compete with them. So I had a manager like that. So, I was helping out the guys next to me. right? The guys needed help because the manager was just busy with his door closed doing his own volume. And the manager quit or the manager left. But he lived good. Or no, they had to fire him, I think, because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do, And they came to me and they were like, you're the one, you've been doing the job anyway. Would you be interested in being a man? So I never got a job I wasn't already doing,
Yeah.
Because I'm more of a nurturing guy. Like I wanted the people around me to do well, So I built my production, and then I kind of became a big producer, in the 90s, late 90s, as a manager. I got to get someone's trying to call me. Became a big producer as a manager. Doing like 250 loans a year. I had a couple of assistants, and that was when I left. I left GMAC. Had a short stint at Mortgage Network, actually, when they were a small company. And then I went to, I got hired by Steve Adamo at North American Mortgage. And that's really where, and then Steve left, and I ended up eventually becoming the manager of that branch. And, things just went on from there. But we were the number one purchase lender in the state at North American Mortgage for a short period of time. With Citizens being number two.
What happened to North American Mortgage? Didn't they get acquired?
They were acquired by Dime Bank Corp, and then Dime was eventually acquired by Washington Mutual. The evil Death Star of the mortgage business that gobbled up everything and then burst into flames over their pay option arms and other such, sins of the past, right? Yeah.
I know. It's funny how a lot of those products, as a footnote to that comment, a lot of those products weren't really all that. They made its way into New England, but it wasn't a real dominant. I think New Englanders are a bit more cautious and a bit more skeptical of the latest and greatest sort of waves. Certainly there was Sunset.
It wasn't really designed for us. It was designed for Palo Alto, California, where she makes 60, he makes 70, but the house cost $1 million, right? But the appreciation was double digit, so they were, they give the borrower the opportunity to leverage the appreciation and buy it. It was never really designed for, working families buying in normal neighborhoods,
Yeah, no, it is kind of interesting. But certainly along the coast, there's plenty of jumbo and high bow sort of products in the coast and going up to Boston. But
I wrote one in my whole career, and it defaulted.
Really?
It didn't. It was an early payment default, but it eventually defaulted. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Big house on Jamestown that I did. A beautiful, jumbo home.
What kind of product was that?
I think it might have been the World Mortgage. It was a pay option arm, with the negative AM feature. It was for an experienced owner who owned a lot of investment properties, and then we had the big crash right in 2007, 2008, where I think they got caught up in that, the people I did it for. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't like, it was a good loan. It was more situational, foreclosure type thing or whatever, short sale. I forget. Yeah.
What would you say to me? Because obviously, your career extends a little bit longer than mine, not by much. I got in, I worked for my father in the 90s, the mid 90s, but I wasn't, when you're working for your dad, I don't really necessarily count that as being like a professional. You're kind of just told what you do. But I jumped in shortly after the .com crash. So I think my first year in the business was 2003.
Mm-hmm.
Probably about 8 or 9 years. What year did you get in 95?
No, I got married in 94, and I had been in the business a little over a year. I think I've been in the business almost so maybe like 92. Yeah.
So there's a chapter of that book that you've read and been a part of that I wasn't, and that's really fascinating. So you've seen these cycles, right? You've seen these.
Yeah, of course, no cycle looks exactly like the last, but yes, I've seen a few cycles. Yeah.
I know, but how would you say, in light of where we've been, where do you think we're going? Because you've seen you saw the rise of Point, the rise of Encompass. You've seen the introduction of
Right.
DUNLP. You saw the introduction of going from paperless and doc vaults. All the innovations around moving documents and annotating documents, and then being able to electronically submit files and that kind of thing. Like, where would you say, where are we going? If you were to guess, if you had to guess, where would you?
I think that everybody keeps trying to refine the mousetrap or build a better mousetrap, right? With all these new tech iterations that come in, and yet it hasn't really changed that much, right? I mean, most industry still works on Encompass and not not Encompass on the web, just like Encompass, So I mean, I think that where it should go is it should continue to, they're moving to more app-based origination. I mean, there's more AI being involved, which really just fills in some blanks for you. I don't think it's going to do the loan for us anytime soon, although there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to go to the bank, go up to the ATM, just give them a thumbprint, and the screen shows you how much you qualify for and when you can close. And all of us would have to learn how to paint houses or park cars because they wouldn't need us anymore. I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't automate it other than, the heavy lifting of compliance. I mean, difficult compliance has become our friend. People are always complaining about this legislation, that legislation, and Elizabeth Warren is ruining our business. Yet were it not for such strenuous compliance, I think a lot of us wouldn't have jobs. You wouldn't need smart people to do this business. You could do it. But where I think it's headed, I mean, I think you're just going to see the automation's going to get a little easier, more, certainly on the operation side, you're going to need, you'll have the same jobs, you'll have processors, you'll have underwriters, but the amount of volume they'll be able to handle, they'll become more efficient, more productive,
Like, so you would, and I actually agree with this, but you tell me if you agree with this yourself. I think Dodd-Frank was sort of a net positive. I mean, lots of things that we could say that's negative, lots of things that we could say that should have done better, could have done better, could have been different. But I would say that it was definitely sort of a net positive.
Well, I think for the consumer, I think it's a mixed bag. On one hand, it's, a lot of the people that were doing the business the wrong way couldn't do the business the wrong way anymore and couldn't hurt consumers. On the other hand, it extremely increased the cost to produce a loan, which of course is passed on to the consumer, right? There's only 100 pennies in a dollar. Money's got to come from somewhere, right? So, as a net, I think it's a net positive in that it does a better job of rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior. I don't know if I'm not smart enough or I haven't looked enough data to know if the cost and the reward are a good balance. But I do think that, you're selling a product that everybody needs and nobody understands. And it's a primary need, shelter, right? I mean, shelter is arguably the most, shelter and food, right, are the most primary needs. So I do think that we should be held to a higher standard. And I think it holds us to a higher standard. So I think it's, to me, it's a net positive as someone who's been somewhat of a Boy Scout his whole career, or accused of being a Boy Scout. I don't see myself that way, but
how would you describe being relevant? Like, how would you? Because you've been in the business a long time, and through these waves, you've been able to be very relevant at every wave. Like, how would you? And you and I both. I mean, I can say I've seen people, peak in their careers, and then they just disappear. Right? Like, how would you say that? How have you been able to be more, continue to be relevant as a pretty major player in Rhode Island and in southeastern New England? Like, how do you remain relevant yourself?
I don't know. I mean, I certainly, I have a certain way of doing business that, that I'm very comfortable with. And, I've been fortunate enough to mentor many other loan officers by having, varying size teams, some very large over the years. But I think it's just, it's like being a doctor that makes house calls, right? I live and sell money in the community that I live in. right? I'm selling it to my neighbors. I'm selling it to my friends. I'm in a state that's relatively small where people, they know a guy who knows a guy who knows you, right? So we're all a little bit connected. And, I think staying relevant is just, really, constantly asking myself, is what I'm doing good for, is it good for my customer? Is it good for my company? And trying to stay focused on everyone else's needs and not so focused on my own. And I find if you do good work and you focus on the needs of the people around you and you try to do your best to meet those needs, so everyone around you is making progress towards their dreams and goals, I think what you build is a community of people that want to work together. And I think that's the most important thing for me, is that as I age, I say, well, how can I keep this job sustainable? I see a lot of guys my age have already, retired or get out of the business. And they say, well, how can you still do it? Well, I really enjoy it, but, I don't work with people that I don't want to work with. I've had people bring me top producers, like, the guy, not my kind of guy. And, what's that expression? Assholes work with assholes and no assholes and refer assholes. So once you have one, then everyone, because, people, like-minded people like each other, right? So, I try to stick, when my phone rings on a Saturday or Sunday with one of my 8 loan officers that I support calling me, I'm glad to hear from them. They're my friends. I'm not rolling my eyes. I'm not this guy again. You know what I mean? Even though I have some guys that are a little slow on the uptake and they call me, takes a couple of times for them to get it when I'm trying to explain to them, I'm still glad to hear from them. I think the key for me is just, trying to treat at the risk of sounding, hokey, trying to treat everyone like family, so that it's fun.
Yeah, no, I think, but as leaders continue to innovate or continue to produce like month in, month out, whether you're an individual producer producing month in, month out, or you're overseeing a group of loan officers whose obligation and you're measured on and paid by their growth as well, in part, in your eyes, especially as we get older, how do we maintain that relevance, do you think, to the younger loan officer? Would you say, and you may have already said it, maybe it's just being actively engaged, mentoring them, being very involved, not just, because there's always those, those leaders that and I use the word lightly, that really are, they sit behind their desk, they're not engaged, they're not reading reports, they're not helping people grow. They're hands off, they're just getting their override or their compensation, and they're constantly out of the office. And
well, the way I support people is very, like you call a friend, a lifeline. I'm there on the weekends if you can't figure something, you want a question on guidelines. I'm very much of a supporter in the day-to-day block and tackle of the business. I am not a great manager when it comes to the planning and all the stuff they want us to do and having all these meetings. I rarely have sales meetings, but I touch each of my people more than once a week. You know what I mean? I find meetings personally, except for occasional meetings on targeting things where you're trying to brainstorm together, I find them incredibly unproductive, because you have a lot of people's needs. They're all in the same rooms, people fighting for attention, people having their things, and it's hard to maintain focus. But I can deliver a message to a group of people much easier on an individual basis, so that I can give them the information in the way that they best digest it, get their feedback, collate that feedback, then put together a document, get it out to people, and then maybe have a meeting and discuss that. Do you know what I mean? So, I think that, my style of leadership, so the young guys generally really appreciate it. Wow, look, I got this, this old fart with 30 something years of experience in the business, that whenever I have a question or need to discuss something, we get together, I teams them in, we go on together and look at guidelines or whatever the issue is, or look something up so that we're learning it together and they're seeing my process. You know what I mean? But I think I have a very immature demeanor. I'm very childlike, I'm goofy. And I think that helps me relate to younger people. I'm not one of those, I don't take myself super seriously. I'm definitely a bit of I'm definitely a bit of a stone crusher, but I can take it too. You want to tease me, I love it. To me, teasing, my dad teased me a lot. So to me, teasing is love, Yeah.
That's the New England way of saying I love you.
Yeah. No, it's true. I just want attention. I don't care if it's positive or negative. As long as I'm getting it, as long as I'm getting attention, right? Yeah.
You know, would you rather have a large team of B players, or just a few or a small select team of A players?
An honest answer to that question, I think A players is such a thing as a critical mass.
Yeah.
That you really can only have one, maybe two in a certain amount of space, right? That too many A players in the same business. And I've seen companies. There was a company that was trying to bring me on as a group. I don't know if we're supposed to share names or not, but it was Leader Bank. At one point, Leader Bank was really looking to expand into other states, and they really were hot on me and my team. And one of the things that, so I'm meeting with these guys, and they're telling me that they really don't want people that do less than 40, 50 million a year, right? So I started thinking about that. So you're chasing me and my team. Maybe two people meet that consistently, right? So you're chasing a team, but you really want us, and yet you're basically telling me that at one point, 2/3, 3/4 of my team is going to have to either get their production up or leave. But the challenge you have with that is that you have some very good originators that have a life, right? That maybe they're only doing, $2 million a month, which is a lot. Or they're doing over 1 million a month, right? But the quality of the work is great. They have really good realtors, and they're not looking to grow. But if you don't want those people, then you're going to give up a lot. Most of the business is done by those people, right? We know this, right? Most producers. So I would say, I think I would rather have, if let's say, for every A player, have 4 or 5 B players. I think that that's really the way to go, because A players need B players.
Yeah.
So that they can be dominant and they can see how good they are. Right? Too many A players, a couple of A players, having 2 or 3 is great because you create a healthy competition, right? With the numbers in the month and who's ahead and who's done this. Well, I've done more units, but I've done more volume. Well, but I've done more FHA, but I've done more super jumbo. Everyone's got their niche, right? Their corner of the business. But I would say that, again, just as someone who's, at my age, I feel like I have something to offer someone in every group. But I don't, the idea of having a branch with 10 A players, it sounds really scary. On the other hand, it also sounds like a fun challenge. So I don't know. I don't know if I have a preference.
How do you define an A player? How would you define that?
How would I define an A player? Someone who is consistently like the top producer at almost every branch they've ever been in, or is at that level?
If you were to,
I couldn't give. You want me to give it a dollar amount?
Yeah. Create a tier. What would you say?
I would say people who could do
it in dollar volume and unit count. I'm curious as to your thoughts.
I would say, to me, anyone who's closing consistently, over say, 36, call it 3 million a month, 2.5 to 3 million a month consistently would definitely be an A player. In units, if there are, anywhere from, 7 units or more, obviously they're bigger loans, 7 units, the small loans, 10 units, would be, I consider. I mean, there are definitely A++ players, right? Guys that do, in excess of 100 million. I've only had, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 producers that have worked for me in my whole career that were, I could honestly say, were $100 million producers mostly, and that's almost like a whole nother, because they work for you, but of course, they can call the CEO anytime they want and complain about you, but that's fine. I mean, I feel like, they're nice to have, because the one challenge you have sometimes, you have this one big producer and you're constantly using them as an example, right? And you have all these people that don't even really aspire to that. So I think that, when you have big producers, on one hand, it's important, I think, to put them up on a pedestal a bit, because that's what they're used to. but I think it's also to, consider who's your audience and maybe not always use them as the example,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fascinating. So, like, what would you say to be your philosophy on C players? Like, I define C players are people that do, you know, maybe 1 to 2 units a month. They're at that 500,000 a month kind of level. And there are those C players who they talk like they're A players, but they'll always be a C player. And then there's those C players who are kind of hungry and ambitious, and they want to get to that B level. And I classify a B player to be in that one, like you said, 1 to 2.5 million a month. Like
Right.
you could be a B plus player, and that's at 1.5 to 2 million a month or a little bit more.
Yeah.
Before you start creeping on the territory of an A player, but that 1 million a month tier, I mean, there's only so many of them. I mean,
Right.
if we were to look at, I mean, honestly, if we looked at RETR, let's just pull up RETR right now. And if we looked at RETR, and I'm gonna share my screen right now. Let's see. So if we looked at RETR, and I looked at find loan officers, let's just start maybe even just nationwide just for a second, right?
Yeah.
And nationwide, and we just did. Let's just do dollar volume just for the sake of basically that's 12 million a year or more, right? So out of 221,000 loan officers, we've already whittled it down to 50,000 LOs. Now that's across all channels. If we eliminated banks and credit unions because they get their leads often from within the bank
Right.
itself, we're looking at 33,000 LOs that do 12 million or more, right?
Yeah.
So now let's look at Rhode Island.
Right.
Right. And this is often from a sales management standpoint, this is where I've struggled a little bit. In the state of Rhode Island, 12 million a year or more, there's only 60 of them in the entire state.
Really? Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I think
12 million or more.
right.
I mean, like, let's just test that theory even further. So in the entire state, there's 1,900 LOs doing any kind of production. 1,900. So that number kind of makes sense, right? Like about 2,000 LOs, small state like Rhode Island, that makes sense, right? But then if you really focus on 12 million or more, that goes down to 60. And you look, I mean, you got our guy Salvatore there at 32 million.
Yeah.
Right. Really.
Yeah.
Loans anywhere 39 million. This is loans in Rhode Island, but
Right.
39, about 40 million. You have your employee there, your partner,
Yeah.
Jesse.
Yep.
Jesse's at 40 million. Right.
Yep.
You got David from Guild, Nathan. I mean, this is like a really.
Yeah. Adam. Yep. Sure. Nate. Yep.
So oftentimes companies will say, Rick, I only want people doing $1 million a month or more. And it's like, really? Okay.
Well, first off, I don't work for those companies. I don't believe in that because.
Me too.
I mean, first off, it's. Are you saying it now? It depends when you're saying it. People don't do the volume now that they did years ago, right? There are market pressures. There's a lack of inventory. There's just the business is done differently. For me, I'm not that. Do they run good, clean, profitable business? Are they? The less volume they do. If they don't do, I have some people that really barely scrape the minimums that you can get to like not get fired, and we've got pretty low ones. I mean, I think I can keep someone like if they do more than 3 million a year, I can keep them if I have a good reason. You know what I mean? But really, what type of business are they doing? Quality? Maybe they're at a time. I have obviously being an older gentleman myself, I have some older loan officers that are. They don't serve time. Time serves them, right? And they do things, and they do it, and they run really clean businesses. Their realtors love them. They're good with. But they might have a bunch of months where they do one loan, but they're not a pain in the butt. They're helpful to other people. They might have extra experience in something like USDA that they'll help others. Just depends on the person. When corporate comes in and makes these, we're looking at a sheet here, and we know that if we cut corporate always wants to cut the bottom 25% because in their mind, they lose money on that.
Yeah.
But when you cut the bottom 25, all you do is create a new bottom 25 that's now the bottom. And if you want to demoralize a guy that's fighting his way up where he was at the bottom and now he's at the middle, take the bottom out from under him and make him at the bottom again and tell me if he's not going to be frustrated, you know? So, I mean, I think companies should make managers justify when they want to keep smaller people and show those people aren't losing money, you know? But you know, I don't believe that that volume is the only basis on which to judge the value and whether or not someone should stay. No,
and I think that's a very sort of human way of looking at it. Like, because you don't know who's going to pop, right? You might have that 8 million a year producer that pops to 15 million a year. You know what I mean? And it's hard. But
but wait, Rick, sorry to interrupt. One thing I'd like to point out is that all of a sudden, we've been writing loans and they keep telling us rates are going to drop and they don't. All of a sudden they drop. Right. Yeah. And now it's all hands on deck. And you're like, gee, I wish I had those 4 guys I fired because maybe they don't do much volume, but they got all their past customers. I mean, a lot of it is just, you're going to have periods of time where you're going to need those people and they're going to make up for it,
Well, I often will use cross country, as an example. Obviously, by probably any measure, probably the best mortgage company in the country. I'll often tell people when people say who's the best mortgage company in the country, I'll often say, well, look, you can say it's cross country. They're the number 1 lender in the country. They have all the products. They're a very sophisticated organization. It's a very unique leadership skill set to be able to grow at that magnitude. It's incredibly impressive. But it kind of depends on your market and who.
Well, best for what?
Best for what?
Exactly. Right, because if cross country is super successful, they're great at growing, they're good at market share, and yet look at the number of people that leave year 3 and year 4, right? So I mean,
my point.
They're good at what they do, very good at it.
My point in saying that though is that, and as you grow a retail platform, all the retail companies, you almost always start, you might have a couple A players, but you have an entire company of B and C players, right? And as you grow, you kind of prune the tree. As you start growing in that evolution, that ladder of hiring more B players, and then you get a few more A players, you're able to sort of prune the tree of some C and D players, and you start growing. People forget that out of cross country's 5,000 loan officers, 1,500 of them do 12 million or up. So it's only 30% of their entire headcount is 12 million and up. So 70% is below 12 million a year, right? And oftentimes people, I think, especially, and this gets to mortgage leadership because you get desensitized of the markets that we work within. And they get sort of almost pompous, and where they say well, I just want, I want to go to Louisiana, and I only want people doing $1 million a month or more. And it's well, let's look at Louisiana right now. How many people, how many would you say in the state of Louisiana do 12 million a year or more? Would you say?
I mean, I don't know, 20 people, 30 people. I mean, it can't be a lot, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So if you take out banks, because again, different channel, there's only 150 LOs in the entire state,
right?
That do, and it's a big state, right? But there's only 150 of them that do 12 million or more.
Or 12 million or more. I got it. Yeah.
And so the point is, and it's tough to make these guys move. It's tough to make any one of these guys move. So if you really whittle it down, let's just say it's. Yes, we're going to touch, in Louisiana, Stephanie Bardo at 77 million, working for, GMFS, whoever that is, Synergy One, James Bickley, 66 million. Fine. Those people are largely going to be extremely difficult to move, right? So if you whittled it down to say, how many people are doing between 12 million and let's say 30 million, right? Of the 150, that's 129 of them, right? So then let's just whittle it down even further. Let's go down to 20. Let's just that band of 1 to 2 million a month. That's going to be, there's 100 LOs that probably are really good targets for that entire state.
Right.
But in the entire state though, how many are there in the entire state? Like we're looking at 5,000 LOs in the entire state.
Right. That's crazy.
Right. So the point is, it's hard. This is why, like, I'm okay saying, hey, let's focus on 500,000. If you focus on 500,000 to 500,000 a month. Oh no, 500,000, 500, 1, 2, 3. And then let's just go to whatever, 24 million. There's your TAM. You got 2,500 LOs of 500,000 and up, knowing that the bulk of that distribution is 500,000 to probably $1 million a month.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that 2,500 LOs, we're looking at between 500,000 a month and or 500,000 a year and 12 million a year. There's 2,400 LOs in that bracket between a minimum of 500,000. So it's just not a lot, like from a sales leadership standpoint.
Right.
When you and I are trying to build these companies and people say, hey, we just want to grow. We want all these top producers. And it's like, good luck. If you get an A player, God bless you. But there's a lot more B and C players.
Well, look, I mean, A players, it's a long game, right? It's a courting game. You develop a relationship with them. You circle back from time to time. You make yourself available as to be a resource, right? So that you can call each other. Hey, have you heard about this thing? Or do you know anything about this lender that just took a loan from me or whatever, right? You develop a fish relationship, and then you sort of, hang out and try to make sure that you're being considered if and when they try to make a move. Whereas with the more sort of basic block and tackle level, producers, people in that, $500,000 a month to $2 million a month range, right? We would call it, right? Say, those people, that it's a little more, having a particular product. We were doing the cash offer. We're doing the cash offer program and the on deck offer program. That attracted some people, right? Because they were able to, give their buyers a leg up in some of these negotiations where they were losing homes. If you've got some tools that you've brought in to help with specific problems, and you speak with those people and they are having those problems and that resonates with them, you have a little better chance because they may not have found, once a guy's done, guy or woman or whatever, have done a ton of business somewhere, they kind of have their thing that they do and they have their resources. People that are still trying to grow to that point are generally more open-minded. Well, gee, what are your guys doing? How are they getting the business? Well, that sounds interesting. Well, if I had that, maybe I could do more business. Okay, well, then let's talk more. I just feel like it's as opposed to going into a bidding war for a gorilla, right? For a big producer, or trying to get, push your way in front of everyone else. With mid-level players, you can develop a relationship, maybe find a fit and really build something and help them get to the next tier. It's hard to take a guy that's doing, already doing, 50, 75 million a year and help him get to the next tier. You're helping him solve problems in his day-to-day, maybe giving him something he was missing because he was losing stuff. But I think it's from a manager perspective, it's much easier to add value to somebody who's at that sort of lower end trying to grow into the tier than to someone who's already there,
That's right. How much longer do you think you'll be in the business?
Well, I've made it so sustainable now that how do you retire? Like, what do I stop? Do I stop answering the phone? Right. I mean, people think about the job people call me. Yeah. I answer the phone, right? I generally know the answer, right? So it's not that hard for me. Yeah. They're really happy they got the answer. My borrowers, my realtors, my loan officers, they kind of have to listen to me, right? My wife, my kids, they don't want to hear it anymore, right? They've heard all the stories, So, I mean, I really feel like if I do retire, if and when I do, I'm going to have to replace it with something. But, I love the people I work with. I know the answers. It's not a strenuous job, right? It doesn't require travel. I used to put on a suit every day. Now, maybe once a month or twice a month, I put on a jacket to go somewhere or meet with somebody. Even the corporate office, when I go up there, it's a casual environment. The job has become something that I can do from almost anywhere. I really enjoy it. I like my people. My retirement planner keeps asking me, well, give me numbers at 70, give me numbers at 75. But I think maybe I'll wake up one day and I'll say I'm done, but even when it's stressful, knowing that I could retire at any time makes me not have to. I never really feel trapped, right? Do you have a bad week?
Does AI replace the loan officer? And let's say the answer is sort of more nuanced, right?
Well, I think.
How do you think, like, as you're peeling that orange, right? There's gonna be parts of that some that are just gonna stick to the orange, and then there's gonna be others that are gonna be able to peel. There are gonna be responsibilities that will get peeled away from the LO that are just there's just a better, more efficient way of doing it, right? So what does that look like?
Well, for me, my experience, it's a very big purchase, right? It's the big expense people have. And so, most people still want to speak with a person, work with a person, right? An actual human that they know. But there's a whole generation of people that are in school now that are coming out into the market that are going to be more comfortable dealing with a machine than a person. We already see it. You got a guy that's got no problem plugging in all his information on the online app, his social security number, the access, to his bank account so the AI can verify stuff, right? And yet is nervous about giving me the social security number over the phone, right? So you already have people that are moving in that direction. But at a certain point, I think people will be so used to purchasing and not having to involve people that people will become an annoyance, right? Oh, I got to deal with a person. So I could see the culture flipping from where it is now, where most people want a person, to maybe most people not wanting a person. What's the timeline on that? I couldn't say, but I definitely feel like AI. I think it's not as mysterious as everybody makes it out to be, but also I think it could be just as scary as it might be. It's one of those things where, you've got. I don't know how much you play with it, but the hallucinations can be hysterical, right? You see it refining itself, but it's definitely makes. There are things that I use it for that I would take weeks of analysis that I can do in hours or minutes, because it will create the analysis. It'll pull in the information. I can feed the information back and ask it to compare, and it'll do the comparison and give me the list of questions that I need to ask to figure out what I need to fix. It's like having the smartest person in the world that's read every book in the world there at your fingertips to help you whenever you want. So based on that, it should make us more efficient. Will it replace us? It can. Will it? I don't know.
Yeah. No, it is, it is, I think there'll be aspects of the business that it'll replace. I think similar to, there are some people that will go online, don't need a realtor, will go to Zillow and will kind of do their own research, and they kind of prefer kind of, minimize the involvement of the realtor more and more and more. And there's going to be those that just won't, and I do think there's going to be loans that are just kind of like figure-ish, that HELOC that just flies. You just don't really need a loan officer. You can just kind of hammer it through on.
Yeah, we used to call it, do you want fries with that HELOC, right? Right. Yeah.
Well, I do think that a lot of, like, when our average, FICO is 710, 714, 715. The reality is, a lot of the the vanilla loans, you don't really need a good AI underwriting and good AI processing in LOA. I think you kind of fly through.
It will, but it's going to start with a 5-minute conversation with the loan officer, and then AI will do all the work. It just means there'll be less work. But I think for the most part, discussing, because we've learned that it's much better to give the borrower several options and have them pick one, even though it's an obvious option. That's the most obvious in many cases, that you give them something either in a mortgage coach or some other format that compares the few best ways to do it. explain it to them, tell them to think about it, and tell you which one they think is best. Usually it's the same one you think is best, but the most important is now that they've made that decision, they take ownership. They will defend that decision instead of sitting there and, on the golf course and their buddy says, oh, my buddy just got a loan that's a half a point lower and everything else. And it's just like a fix for 10 years, and instead of wondering, well, gee, why didn't Jonathan offer me that? And should I be suspicious that he's not giving me all the best options? Oh, no, we looked at the options and we made a different choice for this reason. If you give a consumer a few choices and let them choose, then you guys are working as partners together and you're not the salesman that's just telling them what they need. You know what I mean? So I feel like, we started to do stuff like that and that engages them so that they feel like, because they're working with an ally. I always tell them, we work for you. I'm on your timeline. Right? I work for you. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm here to provide a service and find you the most efficient financing that best balances your short-term needs and long-term goals. And if there's something you don't like, or you're concerned, or you think you should try something different, don't be bashful. Speak up. I feel like our sales approach maybe needs to change from what we were trained when we first got into the business. If we've been in a long time, it's to function more like consultants. But I don't think that I think, I haven't met that generation of people yet that aren't going to want that, but they could be coming,
Well, that's the thing. It's always a step function of what people are accustomed to or need. And that's I think the key part of what we're talking about here is that it's not going to happen overnight. And there's always going to be a piece of a population. I do think that what yields from this is loan officers, top performing loan officers are only going to get bigger. You're gonna see
I mean because they'll be able to leverage AI and leverage technology that they'll be able to control more business.
Yeah, they're gonna steal it from something. Jesse will have the opportunity to potentially pick up more and more business from Connecticut or Massachusetts or whatever.
Right.
Than he's ever been in. So all of a sudden, this Jesse, who's normally doing 40 or 50 million a year, could potentially do 300 million a year.
Yeah.
And he's pulling that volume from somebody, and it's going to be this C and D players.
Yeah.
That aren't as technically savvy. So I do think we're going to enter an age of just the mega LO.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot more Shants or a lot more Jessies.
With just whole organizations underneath them, AI and otherwise, human and AI doing the work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, look, you've been awesome with your time, man. This time, went by really, really fast. And I know you got to get going on your stuff, but, dude, I've always thought you're an amazing leader. Really an impressive thought leader, super fun, and a good leader for loan officers. So I'm glad you were able to join us on this.
Oh no, thanks for having me, Rick. This is fun. It's fun to spend a bunch of time talking about yourself. I've forgotten what that's like.
Well, good. Well, this is a wrap. Thank you so much, man.
Take care, brother. Drive fast. Take care.